am Marcia Strand, and a year and a half ago I was privileged to go on an honor flight with my father. He was 94 at the time, he'll be 96 next month. When we went on the honor flight, I had no knowledge of what it was, and the experience was wonderful. There were 50 veterans on that flight, and when we got back to Portland, Quilts of Valor was there and presented all 50 of those veterans with a Quilt of Valor. I was so emotionally taken by the response of the veterans upon receiving these handmade quilts that I decided I would come back, and I telephoned John Yespa and said, John, I would like to do the same thing for our veterans going out on the honor flights here in Reno.
The basic mission is to transport our veterans back to D.C. to show them where it is for their service to sacrifice. They pay for it, their service to sacrifice. At the same time, we try to engage where they become fun. We talk about a little bit of the church. For the most part, everybody's a good church. They are family, and that continues with taking care of veterans to baseball games, to cookouts, to with love. It's just a big group. I can tell you, I don't have any living grandparents. I have about 300 grandparents I get out from anytime.
And then I called Quilts of Valor, and I had to qualify to make the quilts for them. They have very stringent requirements of what a Quilt of Valor is. They expect it to be an heirloom quality quilt, handmade, and that's what they are. Came home, talked to 6 of my friends. 6 of my friends thought, this sounds like a good idea. And so the 7 of us began a year ago January making quilts, and we presented our first quilts for the April honor flight of 2015. Last year we were able to make and present 199 Quilts of Valor to veterans. This year, in April and in May, we have presented 80. We are ready to present another 30 in June. We expect to do around 250 quilts this year. We started with the 7, and now we have a total of 75 men and women volunteering to help make these quilts. The quilts, someone can wash and iron fabric before we cut them out. Another woman or man can cut the fabric. Another person can sew the tops together. Another person sandwiches them together to do the actual quilting. Another person might do the binding, and another person might do the washing and drying. But the important thing is we all take part in being able to make these quilts to be able to give them. When we go to the airport and we meet the flights, the responses of the veterans go much deeper than I had originally thought. And one letter we received was so touching. It was a Vietnam veteran. He had a twin brother. They had both gone into the service, and while this gentleman was in training, his brother was killed in action. He had problems with sleep. He had a twitch in the eye and this deep ache in his heart, and he wrote a letter and told us that the trip, the honor flight trip, did so much for him to be able to face the reality and touch his brother's name on the wall. And he was surrounded by his fellow veterans. And when he came home and got the quilt was wrapped around him, and he cried. We normally cry, they cry. It's a very emotional moment for them. He got home, and in his letter to us, he said he'd set the quilt aside, looking at it for a couple days, trying to decide what to do with it. It was cold. He picked the quilt up, he put it around him, he sat in his favorite chair, and he said all of a sudden, the whole ache that he'd been carrying around, this guilt, had left him. And he said he will never be anywhere without that quilt beside him. This is the kind of responses we are hearing now that totally surprised us. We knew they appreciated getting the quilts, but we didn't realize what emotional feeling came over the fact that they received the quilts. And so this is why we are very pleased to be able to continue. We are volunteer. We do have to raise our own funds. All the money that we collect goes 100% to the making of the quilts. Quilts of Valor Foundation is a national foundation. They are a 501c3 corporation, so all donations are tax deductible. but they take no money off the top. They fill out all of the government forms, they do all the reporting. All we do is make the quilts and send our receipts in for reimbursement from this fund that is set up back east. We are not funded by Honor Flight, but we are very proud to say that we were set up specifically to provide the Quilts of Valor to the Honor Flights. Where we need help is for you seniors out there, as we are all seniors, if you have time that you are able to wash and iron fabrics for us, if you have skills in managing websites, if you have skills in getting us in front of different groups of veterans to be able to talk to them about it, this is all helpful. If you are able to sew straight lines on a sewing machine, you can start putting these little bits of pieces of material together and end up with something truly remarkable like this. It's all easy. It's just when it's broken down, it can be done.
My name is Mona Crandall Hook, and I'm one of the original 7 that started with this group to do the quilts. I am not a quilter. I'm the one who does washes, irons, runs errands, helps give the presentations, does photographs. Every little thing that I do is a little piece that helps out the rest of the group get these quilts done. I'm also very fortunate in the fact that my contribution to Comstock Lode Quilters and a book that I wrote for the Vietnam veterans for the Nevada State Society of DAR, and they invited me to go on one of the all Vietnam veteran flights, and it was an absolutely one of the most wonderful experiences I can say I've ever had. My brother is a Vietnam vet. He spent 3 tours in Vietnam as a medic and came back to a horrible reception in the United States. He was coming back because our father had passed away. And he got at the Detroit airport and was hit with rotten fruit and rotten vegetables, which a lot of our Vietnam veterans have experienced. It was never a good homecoming for any of them. And in the years, he just sat with him for years, and 40 years later, he finally told us about it. Hence why I wrote the book and did it for our DAR. Going on the flight was wonderful in the fact that I got the chance to talk to so many of these Vietnam veterans, and they talked to me about stuff that they were afraid of. One group was afraid to go to the wall because there had been 3 of them that had enlisted in the Army together. They had gone through high school together, they had gone through elementary school together, and only 2 of them came back from Vietnam. And they asked me to be with them at the wall, and I was. And the one guy turned to me and I just said, "You need a hug, don't you?" And he said, "Yes." And I gave it to him, and he said, "You have been like this the entire time. You're right there when we need a hug." And I'm thinking, wait till you guys get home and get your quilts. You're gonna be a mess. And they were. I was lucky enough to be able to give, I give up 4 quilts on that flight. It is probably one of the most rewarding, emotional times that you can do when you give a quilt to one of these veterans. They try not to cry, and you tell them, it's okay. It's all right to cry. And their lips are quivering, and they're trying not, and eventually they're crying.
Hi, my name is Lori Thompson, and I moved to Reno 2 years ago, and I heard about honor flights from a lady that I had met that I go hiking with. She had just gotten back from taking her father, as she was the guardian. So I immediately ran home, got online, and put in an application. A year later, I finally got to go on the flight, a little over a year later, because there is such a long waiting list for people that want to get involved with honor flights. And then I found out about the quilts before I'd gone on the flight, and I met these ladies at the pancake breakfast and said, "How do I do this, get involved?" And they told me, so I ran home and made a whole bunch of quilts and realized I'd lost all their contact information. So I just started making phone calls and putting messages on their Facebook page until finally someone found me, and I said, "I've got all these quilts, what do I do?" And someone came and picked them up, and then I started going to the airport and handing them out. But then going on an honor flight as a guardian, it is a great idea. I mean, I knew I liked the idea, but until you're standing at a monument with a soldier from that war, and you see the reaction and the effect. And when you land and the fire trucks spray the plane in honor of the veterans, and when you get off a plane to change planes or wherever, and the entire airport stops and applauds as you walk by, the effect it has on the veterans. And coming down that ramp when you get back to Reno with everybody lined up, applauding and shaking hands, is more. And then most of them at the time did not know about the quilts. And you go down to the room and all of a sudden they're handed a quilt that has been custom handmade just for them with their name and their service on it. That is the final straw. They just break down. It is the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And I love to sew and I love to make quilts. How many quilts do you really need to make if you don't have a reason? So now I have a reason for a hobby that I really love doing, and I know I'm having a very positive effect on these veterans and the camaraderie with all the women we've met. And we don't see each other very often because we all work separately in our homes and then just hand it off. Meeting at the airport is one place we get to meet each other. And it's wonderful. And it's a joy to make these quilts, and you cannot get away from that airport without a hug from almost every single serviceman because they are so thrilled and so honored. So I really, really recommend, if there's any way you can get involved, to get involved because it's such a worthwhile thing.
To clarify what a presentation is for these veterans, when they come down and we show them the quilt folded with their name on and their service and what war they were in, it's a very touching moment for them. We then open the quilt up so that they can see the quilt first. Then we literally wrap them in the quilt. We wrap the veteran in the quilt, and then we give him his quilty hug, and that's when we both break down. But one of the fun things that has happened is not one, but two different veterans on two different flights said, "Man, that honor flight was the greatest thing. It was the cake and the icing. But this quilt is the cake, the icing, the sprinkles, and the champagne." I thought that really said it very nicely. You can get a hold of us at Comstock Lode Quilters, Post Office Box 1065, Dayton, Nevada, 89403. My phone number is 775-742-8466. We have a Facebook site which is called Comstock Lode Quilters and Quilts of Valor. We post all the photos that we take of the veterans. We take photos of the quilts that we have made so that you can get ideas, but that's all on the Facebook site. Email is comstocklodequilters@yahoo.com.